Hello everybody, and welcome back. We are now in our 9th video. I want to apologize for everybody. Apparently, and I think I mentioned it when I uploaded the 8th one, it was only then that I realized number 7's missing. Interesting. I remember uploading it. It's because it's now just kind of free floating out there because I uploaded it via my normal account. But it's still out there. Just you can look it up and find that. I mean, it's not that big a deal. You can still find it. It's just not on my official channel. So, sort of think of it as an addendum, I suppose. Now, we can get right into the meat of it this time with the history of the Bill of Rights. Whether or not we actually go into any actual terms of art this time, I'll make it a judgment call, because I don't want to keep everyone here for hours on end, because, you know, people barely have that 6 minutes of time to microwave a bowl of mac and cheese, much less sit here and listen to me yak all night. So, we will just start out and see how it goes from there. As is always the case, it's best to color the background of our proposed object of study with its historical context. When the convention concluded its work on September 17th of 1787, a new constitution had been forged for the United States of America, and when finally ratified by the required minimum number of states, it went into effect a short time thereafter in 1788. However, still prevalent among the states was the fear that they would lose much of, if not most of, their sovereignty to the newly established federal government. Almost immediately there was a cry from the anti-federalists, who were those who had opposed the ratification of the Constitution for any of a number of reasons, for an American equivalent to the English Bill of Rights, with Thomas Jefferson and George Mason being the main proponents thereof. Meanwhile, Alexander Hamilton and James Wilson were among those who opposed the measure. Jefferson, and especially Mason, one of the major delegates at the convention, insisted repeatedly that states' rights would remain in danger so long as there was no explicitly written document to protect them. However, they were both rebuffed, since a great portion of their peers saw a Bill of Rights as unnecessary. Hamilton was particularly vocal about his belief that a Bill of Rights would be either unneeded or even counterproductive. In Federalist number 84. He wrote that, quote, "Bills of rights, in the sense and to the extent in which they are contended for, are not only unnecessary in the proposed Constitution, but would even be dangerous. They would contain various exceptions to powers which are not granted, and on this very account would afford a colorable pretext to claim more than were granted. For why declare that things shall not be done which there is no power to do? Why, for instance, should it be said that the liberty of the press shall not be restrained when no power is given by which restrictions may be imposed? I will not contend that such a provision would confer a regulating power, but it is evident that it would furnish, to men disposed to usurp, a plausible pretense for claiming that power." End quote. However, since nearly all of the states, once more fearing the usurpation of their rights and sovereignty, were clamoring for a Bill of Rights, the majority of the founders thought it expedient and appropriate for the sake of unity to grant this concession more or less as the price of the ratification of the Constitution. So to assuage the fears of the states and bolster popular support for the Constitution, the following took place. And I'm quoting from Forrest MacDonald's A Constitutional History of the United States. Quote, "James Madison took the lead. Studying the proposals that had been made formally or informally in the ratifying conventions, he eliminated duplicates and found 80 recommended amendments. Dismissing the least practical and least popular, Madison reduced the remainder to 19 proposed amendments and introduced them to the House in May of 1789. Debates were held off and on until August 24th. Madison's proposal that the amendments be woven into the text of the Constitution rather than just being tacked on at the end was defeated. But, except for being consolidated into 17 amendments, they passed the House much as he had introduced them. On September 2nd, the Senate took up the proposals and immediately made a fundamental change. In the form in which the amendments had passed the House, they would have applied to the states as well as the national government. Hence, for example, states would be prohibited from restraining freedom of speech. The Senate removed the applicability to the states. Otherwise, the Senate generally concurred with the House, though it and a joint House-Senate committee had met that met on September 25th consolidated the amendments further, leaving only 12 amendments to be sent to the states for approval." End quote. The amendments as they stood after their final consolidation were considered, and all but the first two were approved. They went into effect in 1791. Now, you'll notice they had narrowed it down to 12, but eventually only 10 of them ended up being ratified. You may wonder about what those two remaining ones were. The first one is still out there floating around, could theoretically be ratified at some later date, but it mostly applied to representation in Congress, and it would make things really, really complicated. There would be like a much larger amount of representatives in the House, etc., etc. So it's very unlikely that it'll ever get ratified. The second one that didn't get passed, is now officially a part of the Constitution as of the 1990s, when it became the 27th Amendment to the United States Constitution. It more or less forbade Congress from raising its own pay without an intervening session of Congress taking place. So even though it was proposed in 1789 and was ratified in 1992, I believe, that means what? It took 203 years for them to pass the 27th Amendment. And we wonder why the mail was so slow. With that being said, a most important historical notion critical to understanding these amendments is that the federal government did not create the states. Rather, the states created the federal government. The federal government only had that power which the states willfully ceded to it, be it explicitly or implicitly, and nothing more. This notion is not a mere theory. It is built right into the Constitution in Amendment 10, which reads, and I quote, "The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution," the United States meaning the whole Union, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people," end quote. It was also universally understood at that time that, according to Walter Burns, quote, "What was beyond dispute was the purpose of the original amendments. They were adopted in order to limit the powers of the national government, not of the states," end quote. Now this point is critical. As stated in the excerpt from MacDonald, the Bill of Rights only applies to the federal government. The states were to remain unfettered and unaffected by that document in its entirety. While the preceding overview that I've just given of the Bill of Rights history is comparatively brief, it's sufficient at this point. And any further necessary details, I believe, will be added as appropriate. And with that, we can now examine the terms of art that are contained within the text of the Bill of Rights. And that would lead us right into the First Amendment, obviously Amendment 1. And that is relatively lengthy and complicated. It seems relatively simple at first glance, but obviously, given the progression of history, it would seem expedient to take a long period of time on it. So, given that it would be relatively lengthy, I think we can just consider that this video was nothing more than a historical overview or setting up the context of the Bill of Rights, and we can let the actual study of its contents go until next time. So with that, I suppose we can wrap up for this time. Again, so it seems like these videos are getting progressively shorter, and a lot of you are probably happy about that. So with that, we'll just leave. We'll leave everything until next time, where we'll actually dive into the first half of Amendment 1. And then the second half of it we can get into in the next video after that. So with that, I suppose I could say good night, God bless, and I hope everybody can take care until next time. Alright, see you then. Bye-bye.